Imagine discovering that everything you think you know about yourself is a lie. That beneath the surface of your everyday thoughts, beneath your personality, your beliefs, your very identity, lies someone else entirely, someone you've never met. What if I told you that the real you is waiting to be born? That the person you are right now might be nothing more than a collection of other people's expectations, social programming, and fear-based compromises? Friedrich Nietzsche posed a question that has haunted philosophers for over a century. What if becoming your authentic self isn't about discovering who you already are, but about creating who you might become?
You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
That's not just a famous movie scene, it's the exact choice Nietzsche was offering over 100 years earlier. The comfortable illusion versus the difficult truth. The pre-written script versus the blank page where you must write your own story. But here's what makes Nietzsche's challenge so unsettling. What if the authentic you doesn't exist yet? What if, instead of finding yourself, you have to create yourself? I should warn you now. This isn't going to be a feel-good exploration of self-discovery. Nietzsche's philosophy is dangerous. It requires you to question your deepest values, to stare into the abyss of meaninglessness, and to take complete responsibility for who you become. The question isn't whether you have the courage to discover who you are. The question is whether you have the courage to invent who you are. So if you're ready to take your own red pill, let's begin our journey into one of philosophy's most liberating and terrifying ideas. Before we dive into how movies illuminate Nietzsche's ideas, let's get clear on what he actually meant. Become who you are comes from Nietzsche's book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, where he writes, "What does your conscience say? You shall become who you are." But what does this even mean? If I already am who I am, how can I become it? The key insight here is that Nietzsche believed our true self isn't something we're born with fully formed. It's something we create through a lifetime of choices, struggles, and growth. We're born with potential, with inclinations, with unique perspectives. But our authentic self is something we must actively craft.
We don't read and write poetry because it's cute. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race, and the human race is filled with passion. Answer, that you are here, that life exists, and identity. That the powerful play goes on and you may contribute a verse.
Robin Williams' character captures something essential about Nietzsche's philosophy here. Life is a blank page, and we're challenged to write our unique verse upon it. Not the verse others expect, not the safe or conventional verse, but the one that expresses our deepest nature. Nietzsche was rebelling against two powerful forces he saw shaping people in inauthentic ways. First, the herd mentality, our tendency to conform to social expectations rather than developing our distinct identity. Second, ressentiment, a French term describing the tendency to define ourselves by what we oppose rather than by what we affirm. So becoming who you are involves both negative and positive freedom. Negative freedom means breaking free from external constraints, all the thou shalt nots imposed by society, religion, and convention. But positive freedom is the harder part, the what now, after you've rejected those external authorities. Nietzsche uses the metaphor of three spiritual transformations in Zarathustra: the camel, the lion, and the child. The camel bears the weight of existing values and traditions, dutifully carrying what others place upon it. The lion says no to external commands and creates freedom from obligation. But only the child can say a sacred yes to life and begin creating new values.
You don't have to be the bad guy.
I know it might seem strange to reference the Lego movie when discussing Nietzsche, but it actually provides a perfect, accessible metaphor. Emmett's journey from instruction follower to creative master builder mirrors Nietzsche's spiritual transformations. We start by following the instructions society gives us, then we rebel against those instructions, and finally, we learn to create our own authentic path. To understand the urgency behind Nietzsche's call to become who you are, we need to understand one of his most famous pronouncements. God is dead. This wasn't merely an atheistic statement. Nietzsche was announcing something more profound, the collapse of an entire framework of meaning that had structured Western civilization for centuries. Without God as the ultimate source of meaning and morality, humans faced a terrifying freedom. We suddenly had to create meaning for ourselves in what could feel like an indifferent universe. This realization could lead to nihilism, the belief that life has no inherent meaning or value.
God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. Who will wipe this blood off us? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent?
Chidi's paralysis in The Good Place brilliantly illustrates the nihilistic trap Nietzsche warned against. When all external frameworks of meaning collapse, we can become frozen, unable to create our own values or make meaningful choices. But Nietzsche didn't see nihilism as the end point. He saw it as a necessary transition, a clearing away of old structures to make room for authentic self-creation. The death of God isn't just a crisis, it's an opportunity for humanity to grow up and take responsibility for creating its own meaning.
Nobody exists on purpose. Nobody belongs anywhere. Everybody's gonna die.
Rick's nihilistic perspective actually contains a hidden liberation that Nietzsche would appreciate. By accepting the absence of cosmic purpose, we're freed to create our own. When nothing is predetermined, everything becomes possible. But here's where things get interesting, and where Nietzsche's philosophy becomes truly radical. Becoming who you are isn't about discovering some pre-existing authentic self that's been hiding underneath social conditioning. It's about creating yourself through your choices. As Nietzsche put it, the individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. But for Nietzsche, this struggle isn't just about breaking free from social constraints. It's about the much harder work of self-creation. At the heart of Nietzsche's philosophy is what he calls the will to power. Often misunderstood, this isn't primarily about dominating others. Instead, it refers to our drive to overcome resistance, to grow stronger, to expand our capabilities. For Nietzsche, life itself is will to power, a continuous process of self-overcoming. We become who we are by constantly surpassing who we've been. The authentic self isn't a fixed destination, but an ongoing journey of growth and transformation.
Some men aren't looking for anything logical, like money. They can't be bought, bullied, reasoned, or negotiated with. Some men just want to watch the world burn.
While that famous line from The Dark Knight might seem to paint the Joker as a pure nihilist, Nietzsche would see something different. The Joker isn't simply destructive, he has created himself as an agent of chaos, rejecting society's values and establishing his own. He represents a dark version of what can happen when someone rejects conventional morality, but fails to create life-affirming values in their place. Nietzsche was deeply concerned about what would fill the vacuum left by the death of God. Would we create beautiful, life-affirming values? Or would we fall into destructive nihilism? Perhaps worse, simply adopt new forms of herd morality.
We've all been raised on television to believe that one day we'd all be millionaires and movie gods and rock stars. But we won't. We're slowly learning that fact. And we're very, very pissed off.
Fight Club brilliantly portrays both the rebellion against conventional values and the danger of replacing them with equally restrictive ideologies. Tyler Durden begins as a Nietzschean figure breaking free from consumer society, but he ultimately creates his own cult-like movement, substituting one form of conformity for another. This illustrates a crucial aspect of Nietzsche's philosophy. True self-creation doesn't mean merely replacing one external authority with another. It means developing the capacity to generate your own values based on what truly affirms your life and potential. For Nietzsche, self-overcoming isn't about achieving some final state of perfection. It's about embracing the continuous process of growth itself. As he famously wrote, "Man is something that shall be overcome." What have you done to overcome him? This brings us to one of Nietzsche's most important concepts, the Übermensch, often translated as Superman or Overman. This isn't a superhero with special powers, but rather a person who has overcome conventional morality and created their own values. The Übermensch embraces becoming, rather than being, continuous growth rather than fixed identity. Now, we come to what Nietzsche considered the ultimate test of whether you're truly becoming who you are. the thought experiment of eternal recurrence. Imagine that a demon appears to you one night and tells you that you must live your life exactly as you've lived it, with all its pain and joy, again and again for eternity. Every decision, every moment of suffering, every triumph, all of it repeating endlessly in precisely the same way. Would this news crush you? Or would you recognize this demon as divine, grateful for a life so worth living that you'd willingly repeat it infinitely?
What would you do if you were stuck in one place, and every day was exactly the same, and nothing that you did mattered?
Bill Murray's character in Groundhog Day accidentally finds himself living Nietzsche's thought experiment. At first, he responds with despair, then hedonism, then suicide attempts. All responses Nietzsche would recognize as failing the test. But eventually, Phil Connors begins to transform. He uses his endless repetition to master new skills, to help others, to become more fully himself. By the end, he's created a day so authentic and meaningful that he could hypothetically live it forever without despair. The eternal recurrence isn't just a test, it's a tool for living. It asks us to make choices as if we'll have to live with them forever. It challenges us to transform even our suffering into something we could affirm as necessary to becoming who we are. As Nietzsche put it, "My formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity, not merely bear what is necessary, still less conceal it, but love it." Amor fati, love of fate, doesn't mean passive acceptance. It means actively embracing everything that happens as essential to your becoming.
Hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies.
The Shawshank Redemption portrays a distinctly Nietzschean journey. Andy Dufresne doesn't just endure his unjust imprisonment, he transforms it into an opportunity for becoming. He doesn't let the prison define him. Instead, he creates meaning within those walls and eventually breaks free, not just physically but spiritually. Andy embodies what Nietzsche called the spirit of a free man. He takes responsibility for his existence even under oppressive conditions. He doesn't blame, complain, or surrender to resentment. Instead, he affirms his life through continuous self-overcoming. So far, we've explored Nietzsche's philosophy of becoming who you are. But why is this journey so difficult? What stands in our way? The first major obstacle is what Nietzsche calls the spirit of gravity, the heaviness that pulls us down into conventional patterns. This includes our tendency toward comfort, security, and social approval. Becoming who you are requires fighting against these gravitational forces.
We accept the reality of the world with which we're presented.
The Truman Show brilliantly illustrates how our reality is often a constructed stage designed to keep us in comfortable patterns. Like Truman, we frequently accept these limitations without questioning them. The people who benefit from our compliance, represented by Christoph, will use fear and comfort to keep us from venturing beyond the boundaries they've established. The second major obstacle is the fear of responsibility. When external authorities no longer tell us what to do, we must bear the burden of creating our own meaning and values. This freedom can be terrifying.
He's sitting there and he asks me, if there's no God, why was I born? He tells me he's got no purpose.
The Sopranos repeatedly explores how difficult it is to change and become authentic, even when we recognize our patterns are destructive. Tony Soprano's therapy sessions reveal someone who glimpses the possibility of transformation, but recoils from the responsibility it would require. The third obstacle is resentment, harboring resentment toward others rather than focusing on our own becoming. Nietzsche saw resentment as a reactive rather than creative force, one that keeps us defined by what we oppose rather than what we affirm.
For my whole life, I didn't know if I even really existed. But I do. And people are starting to notice.
The 2019 film Joker shows a character whose transformation appears liberating, but is actually driven by resentment rather than authentic self-creation. Arthur Fleck doesn't transcend his circumstances to become something greater. He's consumed by resentment toward those who wronged him. He mistakes destruction for creation. Nietzsche would view Arthur's journey not as becoming who he is, but is being determined by his reactions against others. True self-creation requires moving beyond blame and resentment to active, affirmative values. Earlier, I mentioned Nietzsche's 3 spiritual transformations: the camel, the lion, and the child. Let's explore these more deeply as stages in becoming who you are. The camel represents our initial state, dutifully carrying the weight of tradition, social expectations, and inherited values. Most of us begin here, accepting the reality we're presented with and trying to succeed within its parameters.
I just want to say one word to you. Just one word.
Yes, sir.
Are you listening?
Yes, I am.
Plastics.
The Graduate perfectly captures the camel stage. Benjamin Braddock is expected to carry forward the values of his parents' generation, pursuing a conventional career, marrying appropriately, and living the prescribed and successful life. The famous plastics scene symbolizes how older generations hand down what they consider valuable wisdom, expecting the younger generation to dutifully bear it forward. But this stage cannot last for someone seeking to become who they are. Eventually, the questions arise. Why am I carrying these particular burdens? Who decided these were valuable? Do these values truly reflect who I am? This leads to the second transformation, the lion. The lion represents the power to say no, to reject external authorities and create freedom from obligation. This is the rebellious stage where we challenge conventions and break free from expectations.
Rip out the entire page. You heard me. Rip it out. Rip it out! Come on, rip it out!
This iconic scene captures the lion stage perfectly. By literally destroying the conventional approach to poetry, Keating is teaching his students to question authority and make room for their own perspectives. The lion stage is necessary but insufficient. It clears space but doesn't yet create something new to fill that space. The final and most difficult transformation is the child. The child represents innocence, a fresh start, and the ability to say a sacred yes to life and begin creating new values.
I get to touch people's lives with what I do. And it keeps me going, and I love it. And I think if you give it a shot, you might love it too.
The film Chef beautifully portrays the child stage of transformation. After rejecting the constraints of working in a conventional restaurant, the lion stage, Carl Casper rediscovers the joy and creativity that drew him to cooking in the first place. He creates something authentic that expresses his true passion, unconcerned with critics or conventional success metrics. The child stage isn't about returning to childishness, but about regaining the creative innocence that allows for genuine self-expression. It's about saying yes to your own values rather than merely saying no to others. Not everyone completes all 3 transformations. Many remain camels their entire lives, dutifully carrying values they never questioned. Others become lions but get stuck in perpetual rebellion, defining themselves by what they oppose rather than what they affirm. Only those who reach the child stage truly begin the process of becoming who they are. As Nietzsche put it, the child is innocence and forgetting, a new beginning, a game, a self-rolling wheel, a first movement, a sacred yes. Once you've passed through these transformations, the real work begins, creating your own values. This doesn't mean arbitrary choices, but finding what truly enhances and expresses your unique nature. Nietzsche distinguished between master morality and slave morality. Master morality springs from an affirmation of one's own life and power. It says, "This is good because it expresses who I am." Slave morality, by contrast, begins with resentment toward others and says, "What limits their power over me is good." Creating your own values means developing a master morality, one based on affirmation rather than reaction.
We created a paradise out of Plato's Republic. Our children shall be philosopher kings.
Captain Fantastic shows a father raising his children to question everything and think for themselves, even questioning his own teachings. Ben wants his children to develop their own values rather than merely accepting conventional wisdom or even his alternative wisdom. He's teaching them the process of value creation rather than just handing them a different set of pre-made values. But creating your own values doesn't mean rejecting all traditions or existing wisdom. It means engaging with them critically, taking what enhances your life and leaving what doesn't. Nietzsche wasn't advocating moral relativism where anything goes. He believed in standards, but standards that emerge from life itself rather than transcendent authorities. The question isn't, does this conform to universal rules? But, does this affirm life? Does this express my highest potential? As he wrote, the noble type of man experiences itself as determining values. It does not need approval. It judges what is harmful to me is harmful in itself. It knows itself to be that which first accords honor to things.
There are no two words in the English language more harmful than good job.
Whiplash presents a complex case study in Nietzschean self-overcoming. Fletcher's brutal methods push Andrew to transcend conventional standards and discover his own potential for greatness. The film asks difficult questions about what we're willing to sacrifice to become who we truly are. While Fletcher's abusive approach isn't what Nietzsche advocated, the film captures something essential about Nietzsche's philosophy. Becoming who you are isn't comfortable. It requires confronting your limitations, enduring suffering, and continuously pushing beyond what you thought possible. In our social media age, the concept of becoming who you are faces new challenges. We're constantly performing identities online, crafting personas, and seeking validation through likes and follows. Nietzsche would likely see this as a new form of herd mentality, appearing authentic rather than actually being authentic. True authenticity isn't about how others perceive you. It's about alignment between your actions and your deepest nature. It's about creating a life that would pass the test of eternal recurrence. Black Mirror's Nosedive episode brilliantly illustrates how social validation systems can prevent authentic becoming. Lacey's entire existence revolves around how others rate her, leading to a completely performative life. Her breakdown, near the end when she finally speaks her truth regardless of consequences, represents her first authentic moment. Nietzsche would recognize our social media culture as creating new obstacles to becoming who we are. When external validation is quantified through likes, shares, and followers, the pull toward performative rather than authentic identity becomes even stronger. True authenticity often requires periods of solitude, what Nietzsche called going under. We need time away from the madding crowd to hear our own thoughts and connect with our deeper nature. As Nietzsche wrote, "The secret for harvesting from existence, the greatest fruitfulness and the greatest enjoyment is to live dangerously. Build your cities on the slopes of Vesuvius, send your ships into uncharted seas." This call to live dangerously isn't about physical risk-taking, but intellectual and spiritual courage, the willingness to question deep assumptions and venture beyond comfortable certainties.
I mean, the core of man's spirit comes from new experiences.
Into the Wild portrays someone seeking authentic existence by rejecting society entirely. While McCandless's journey ended tragically, his impulse to break free from convention and discover himself through direct experience resonates with Nietzsche's philosophy. However, Nietzsche would likely critique McCandless for not moving beyond rejection to creation. True becoming isn't found in merely escaping society, but in creating something meaningful, whether within or outside social structures. As Nietzsche put it, the individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will be lonely often and sometimes frightened, but no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. For Nietzsche, becoming who you are isn't something you complete. It's not about reaching a final state of authenticity where you can rest. Instead, it's a continuous process of growth and self-overcoming. He distinguishes between the last man, who seeks only comfort and security, and the higher man who embraces challenge and transformation. The higher man doesn't say, "I found myself," but "I am continuously becoming."
My mom always said life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get.
While Forrest Gump might seem an unlikely Nietzschean hero, his openness to life and continuous becoming embodies something essential in Nietzsche's philosophy. Forrest doesn't cling to fixed identity. He flows with life's possibilities, creating meaning through his journey. The contrast between Forrest and Lieutenant Dan illustrates different responses to life's challenges. Dan initially rejects his fate, filled with resentment over his lost destiny. Only when he makes peace with what happened and embraces new possibilities does he begin truly becoming himself. Nietzsche would remind us that becoming who you are isn't about discovering some hidden, authentic core self that was always there. It's about creating yourself through your choices and responses to life's challenges. As he wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." This beautiful metaphor suggests that true becoming requires embracing internal conflict and contradiction rather than seeking comfortable resolution.
Despite knowing the journey and where it leads, I embrace it. I welcome every moment of it.
Arrival presents a profound Nietzschean choice. Louise Banks chooses to have her daughter even knowing the heartbreak that awaits. This embodies amor fati, love of fate, in its purest form. She doesn't merely accept what's necessary. She actively embraces it as essential to her becoming. This exemplifies what Nietzsche meant when he wrote, "My formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity." So how do we apply Nietzsche's challenge to become who you are in our modern context? What does this journey look like today? First, it requires critical consciousness, the ability to recognize how external forces shape your identity. From family expectations to social media algorithms, countless influences try to mold who you are. Becoming who you are starts with identifying these influences and questioning which truly serve your flourishing.
The classic saying is, if you're not paying for the product, then you are the product.
The Social Dilemma reveals how digital technologies design our environment to shape our behavior and even our thoughts. Nietzsche would see these algorithms as a new form of herd mechanism, subtly guiding us toward conformity while maintaining the illusion of free choice. Becoming who you are today requires vigilance against these invisible influences. It means consciously choosing what information you consume, rather than letting algorithms decide based on what will keep you engaged longest. Second, becoming requires experimentation. You discover who you are by trying different ways of living, thinking, and creating, then reflecting on which truly express your nature.
You're dead, Carl. You say no to life, and therefore you're not living. You make up excuses to the people around you and to yourself.
While Yes Man simplifies the concept, it captures the importance of breaking patterns and trying new approaches to life. Carl discovers aspects of himself that were dormant until he began experimenting with a different way of engaging with the world. This experimental approach is essential to Nietzsche's vision of becoming. As he wrote, "How many people know how to observe something? Of 100 people, 99 don't observe at all." True self-discovery requires looking closely at how different choices affect your sense of power and vitality. Third, becoming who you are requires courage, the willingness to face disapproval, uncertainty, and failure. Our social nature makes us crave acceptance, which often leads to compromise and conformity. Overcoming this pull requires the courage to stand apart when necessary. As Nietzsche put it, the secret of realizing the greatest fruitfulness and the greatest enjoyment of existence is to live dangerously. Build your cities on the slopes of Vesuvius.
Don't ever let somebody tell you you can't do something. Not even me. You got a dream, you got to protect it.
The Pursuit of Happiness shows someone refusing to let circumstances determine his identity. Chris Gardner maintains his vision of who he is and can become despite overwhelming obstacles. His courage isn't just about endurance, but about maintaining his self-conception against all evidence to the contrary. Finally, becoming who you are requires creation, actively shaping your life according to your own values rather than merely reacting to circumstances. This means developing the capacity to generate meaning even in difficult situations.
Game is serious, you know.
I just don't get this game, Papa. How many points do we have so far?
687, give or take a few, but I've told you this already.
And we're playing a game. Whoever gets to 1,000 points first wins a real tank. Life is beautiful, presents perhaps the most profound example of Nietzschean meaning creation. In the horror of a concentration camp, Guido creates a game that transforms his son's experience. He doesn't merely endure tragedy, he actively shapes how that tragedy is experienced. This illustrates what Nietzsche meant when he wrote, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." Creating your own values means finding or creating meaning even in suffering. We've covered a lot of ground, exploring Nietzsche's challenge to become who you are. From the death of God to the eternal recurrence, from the 3 spiritual transformations to the creation of values, we've seen how this deceptively simple phrase contains one of philosophy's most profound challenges. Nietzsche wasn't offering an easy path. Becoming who you are requires questioning deeply held beliefs, facing uncomfortable truths, and taking responsibility for creating meaning in a world that offers no pre-made answers.
Everything is more complicated than you think. You only see 1/10 of what is true. There's a million little strings attached to every choice you make.
Synecdoche captures the dizzying complexity of self-creation. When all external frameworks of meaning collapse, we face the overwhelming task of creating not just our values, but our understanding of reality itself. The film shows both the terror and beauty of this responsibility. So what can we take from Nietzsche's challenge today? First, question the sources of your values. Ask yourself, am I living according to inherited beliefs I've never examined? Am I defining myself by what I oppose rather than what I affirm? Am I seeking comfort and security at the expense of growth? Second, embrace experimentation. Try different ways of thinking and living. Pay attention to what makes you feel more alive, more capable, more connected to your deeper nature. As Nietzsche wrote, one must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. Third, develop the capacity for solitude. Create space away from external influences to hear your own thoughts and connect with your deeper impulses. True becoming requires periods of going under, retreating from the crowd to find your own path. Fourth, practice amor fati, love of fate. Instead of resenting life's difficulties, try to embrace them as necessary aspects of your becoming. Ask, how can this challenge help me grow? What can I create from this suffering? What would it mean to affirm this moment as essential to who I am becoming? Finally, remember that becoming who you are isn't a destination but a continuous journey. There's no final state of authenticity where the work ends. As Nietzsche put it, man is something that shall be overcome. What have you done to overcome him?
The only way to be happy is to love. Unless you love, your life will flash by.
The Tree of Life, with its cosmic perspective, reminds us of both our insignificance and our profound capacity for meaning creation. Like the characters in the film, we exist within vast processes we didn't choose, yet we retain the power to shape how we experience and respond to these processes. This tension between determinism and freedom lies at the heart of Nietzsche's philosophy. We don't choose the circumstances of our birth or many of life's challenges, yet we retain the freedom to create meaning within these constraints. As our journey through Nietzsche's philosophy comes to a close, I invite you to reflect on your own process of becoming. What inherited values might you need to question? What aspects of yourself have you been suppressing to fit in? What would it mean for you to create, rather than merely discover who you are? Becoming who you are isn't a self-help technique, but an existential challenge that requires courage, creativity, and continuous self-overcoming. It's not about finding some authentic core that was always there, but about creating yourself through your choices and responses to life. As Nietzsche himself put it, no one can build you the bridge on which you, and only you, must cross the river of life. There may be countless trails and bridges and demigods who would gladly carry you across, but only at the price of pawning and forgoing yourself. There's one path in the world that none can walk but you. Where does it lead? Don't ask, just walk. Thank you for joining me on this philosophical journey. If you found value in these ideas, please consider subscribing to Aristotle and sharing this video with others who might benefit from it. Until next time, keep becoming who you are.